Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. Our dedication to living life joyfully allows us to confront the reality of unmitigated deception and political denial of the harm caused by nuclear and chemical contamination. We demand an end to corporate control of science and suppression of facts for political and financial gain. We are not assets on a balance sheet. We must honestly work together to remediate damage to benefit our planet and humanity. Remember, happiness is resistance, and love is greater than fear. Join the Age of Fission radio show on Spreaker.com. Search for Lonnie Clark for all our podcasted shows. Podcasts are also on YouTube at Nuts for Art, NUTZFORART. Thank you for being part of the solution. Good evening. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Today is April 25th, and this is actually Chernobyl Day. This is the day that Chernobyl exploded, and I decided I was going to just do a live podcast and post it up to YouTube. I wanted to remind people that these events that happen, we're expected to just forget about it. You know what I mean? Like, Chernobyl happened 33 years ago today. It started. It actually took 2 days for them to put it out, quote, put it out, right? Hundreds of thousands of people were harmed. The denial, if any of you have been listening to Libby Halevi's show, which I highly recommend, Nuclear Hot Seat, a lot of what she talks about is how there is really absolutely no real scientific work going on to figure out the harm that is caused by nuclear contamination. And tonight I want to talk to you guys about the Chernobyl children, because there are children who are still 33 years later being born with actually grotesque and unheard of kinds of mutations that we have never heard of. I am going to read from a web page called the Chernobyl International, Chernobyl-international.com, and it's about the Chernobyl children. It's Chernobyl Children International, but the web page is actually Chernobyl-international.com. And I want to share with you the About page, because these people have done some really beautiful things with these children. They are a group of women and families from actually Ireland who decided to adopt these children from Chernobyl, who were basically left in nursing homes to rot and live their little lives until they die at an early age. The founder is Adi Roach. This is what she says on her page. She says, I started working on Chernobyl in 1986 in the immediate aftermath of the accident and formally founded Chernobyl Children International, CCI, in 1991. My life's work has been to develop programs that restore hope, alleviate suffering, and protect current and future generations in the Chernobyl regions. CCI is based on hope and courage. The hope that the children, one by one and the heartbeat by heartbeat, will thrive, and the courage to envision and create a better world. That to me was a huge statement when I read it, because go to their page. You'll see what I'm talking about. The children there, their best hope is to have a decent life. They have seriously, massively life-altering modifications because of nuclear contamination. And they are now the 4th and 5th generation. And as we know, Dr. Helen Caldicott told us that we don't really see the worst of the genetic mutations until the 4th or 5th 4 to 7 generations after the nuclear accident is when the worst of the nuclear contamination happens. I am actually nonplussed when I think about the Chernobyl accident and how it is still affecting people today. And we don't even know it. There are many women, I've heard many interviews with women who say they can't conceive or they can't maintain a pregnancy. They were teenagers at the time and they've just given up all hope of ever having a family. Or I heard an interview by another woman who tried repeatedly to get pregnant, and when she finally gave birth, she gave birth to a severely mentally challenged baby. Like its brain was grotesquely large, right? Today I went out here in Eugene, Oregon. I went out to stand and protest in front of the federal building between 3:30 and 6 o'clock this evening, just to remind people that it's Chernobyl Day. I actually did not go out on Earth Day because I'm kind of sickened by what Earth Day has turned into. It's not a celebration of the planet. It was a protest against nuclear power. It was against what we had seen and all the lies of what was going on in Chernobyl. It was against the government telling us, oh, don't worry, things are just fine. And 3 days later, we have Chernobyl Day, and everybody, including myself, until this year. I've been doing this nuclear activism since 2013, or actually 13. I became aware of Fukushima in 2012. I actually really did believe that everything was fine, perfectly fine, as President Obama had told us. I had a nightmare that I saw the sky completely orange and I thought, oh my gosh, it's Hanford's on fire. I knew it was real. Well, I went to the internet and discovered, like probably any of you who are out there searching for anything on nuclear contamination, there really is nothing out there. I mean, especially 7 years ago, there really was nothing out there. Now at least you can find Nuclear Hot Seat, you can find my show, you can find other YouTubers that are out there. There's people that have, like Dana Durnford, nuclear proctologist. He has a daily podcast on YouTube. There are people now talking about nuclear contamination, but 5 or 6 years ago, it was really pretty much we hadn't really discovered the meat of the crime here, which in my view, the meat of the crime is that we're not allowed to know. We're on a need-to-know basis, and we don't need to know. And it is not that big a deal to the people in power that our children have basically DNA mutations. They have autoimmune deficiency diseases. They get cancer. They diabetic, schizophrenia, and that's all before they get the cancer. Schizophrenia, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, all of that comes beforehand. You know, when Chernobyl happened, I honestly, again, like I said, I really didn't think about it. It was 1986. I had a 3-year-old child and a 5-year-old child. I was working 3 jobs, frankly, at the time to support my kids living in LA. I remember thinking that the Russians were awful brave to go in there and stop it. But again, just like what happened in Fukushima, I, like most Americans, believed 100% that when the government told us, oh, it's been taken care of, that it was taken care of. I had believed, along with everyone else, that indeed we could stop nuclear accidents. What we have discovered is we don't stop nuclear accidents. We cover them up. That's all we can do. We put the dust, we gather all the dust up in a big pile and stuff it under the carpet. And we hope the carpet's big enough for all the waste that we got going on. And right now there's a big argument in America about some people want Yucca Mountain. Even though it's on top of one of the biggest water ducts in the country, they still want to put nuclear contamination above it. So we're in this weird la-la land zone. And we are reminded every time we pass a day like Chernobyl Day or Fukushima Day, which really is sickening that we call them these days. 3/11 is Fukushima Day. 4/25 is Chernobyl Day. I mean, These are not dates I want to keep in my head. I was standing out on Franklin Boulevard with a sign that said Chernobyl still harms infants. 33 years, 425, 1986. And there, a few people honked. It was quite interesting. One lady actually slowed down and said, "You should look into Hanford cities before you get freaked out about Chernobyl." I'm like, that was an odd thing to say, because you think that anybody who's out there protesting about Chernobyl, sure the devil knows about Hanford. If she had actually taken time to get out of the car and talk to me, she would have discovered that I am working fervently to close the Columbia Generating Station, because we will have another Chernobyl at Columbia Generating Station if we don't close it down, folks. It cannot sustain greater than a 6.4 earthquake. And you want to know the real truth about the Columbia Generating Station? And the real truth? Prior to Fukushima, the earthquake level that they said it could sustain was 4.6. Isn't that quite interesting how after Fukushima, the state of Washington decided to look at it again, and it said, oh, now it can sustain a 6.4. So they just switched the numbers around. I mean, this is the complete disregard for science that the nuclear industry has. It is beyond comprehension. Libby Halevi, for today's show for Nuclear Hot Seat, interviewed Kate Brown, who wrote a book. What was the title of it? I think she calls it Surviving Chernobyl, Living in the Future, Surviving Chernobyl, or something like that. She talks about how everything is based, all the nuclear standards are based on the documentation that we get from Hiroshima. Only, she mentions that the United States came in and destroyed all the evidence and all the data that the Japanese doctors had taken from their patients. And frankly, they destroyed even the Hiroshima case study because they altered some of the documents. So the study that they base all the nuclear markers on is a faulty study and an inadequate study. Just like when I read that document that I found called Testing the Safety Culture of the IAEA's Safety Culture Model. I was doing some research while I was doing a paper in college about the danger of nuclear energy, and I found this document. I couldn't believe it. In it, it describes that the International Atomic Energy Agency had never empirically tested its safety culture model, which is used at every single nuclear facility. Now, I'm not a scientist, but this was about a 30-page, maybe 40-page report, and I read it on my YouTube channel, Nuts for Art. You guys can find it. It's got its own playlist. It's probably 10 or 15 separate little episodes of 15, 20 minutes a page. To be honest, my eyes, there was times when I read whatever it was I was reading, and then as soon as I stopped reading for YouTube, I had to go back and read it again because I didn't quite understand it. I'm not a scientific type, but the meat and the gist of it was that I got, that it failed. It had 8 markers of safety, and on 7 of them they failed 100%, and on 1 marker of safety, the 1 marker of safety that said employees feel like they can talk to their supervisors about a problem, that passed by 50%. That was the only part that passed. It's beyond shocking. When someone gets involved in this project, I call it a project, I don't really know what it is. The reason I do this is because I am dumbfounded that people don't know. Like me, I consider myself an average American. I was standing out on the street on Franklin Boulevard this afternoon with a sign and a painting that I did of a Chernobyl baby to let people realize that Chernobyl is still damaging children. Seriously, hardcore damaging children. You know, this website, Chernobyl Children, has a bunch of programs to help these families. They have a program called Homes for Hope. They have a program for independent living for the children as they grow up. Because once they reach the age of 18, what they do in Russia is they just move them to adult mental asylums. But now, with the help of CCI, these young people live in a home of their own, and they live independently of institutional care. That's huge for people with disabilities, to be able to live independently instead of being stuck in some state facility for the rest of their lives. You know, many of them have good functional brains. They're not mentally retarded, all of them. A lot of them just have like grotesque physical disabilities. I mean, basically their DNA got mutated. That's what's happened. The ones that survive, the ones that don't survive, they get Chernobyl heart, they get cancer. I encourage everyone to go to ChernobylInternational.com and check out this site and get involved and actually donate. Give them some money and help them. Although, in my heart, I actually think that Bechtel ought to be supporting them. You know, Bechtel is like one of the worst criminals that we've ever had. I mean, I don't know how people live with themselves, to be honest. It stuns me. Yeah, I'm like nonplussed. Let me remind you about this accident that happened. I pulled up the Wikipedia page, and you know, Wikipedia is not like the best source, but it's a quick and dirty that I think we can use as a good resource. Let's see how many minutes I've got going on here. Okay, not bad. Let me just get back to this. The Wikipedia disaster. The Chernobyl accident, also referred to as the Chernobyl disaster, was a catastrophic nuclear accident that occurred on April 26th and 25th, 86, in number 4 nuclear reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, which is now abandoned at the town of Pripyat in northern Soviet Ukraine. The accident occurred during a late-night safety test in which a station blackout power failure, in the course of which both emergency safety and power regulating systems were intentionally turned off. A combination of inherent reactor design flaws and the reactor operators arranging the core in a manner contrary to the checklist for the test eventually resulted in an uncontrolled reaction condition. Water flashed into the steam, generating a destructive steam explosion and a subsequent air graphite fire. That's what would happen at Hanford, to be honest. Once we have a meltdown at CGS, that kind of open air fire is going to happen at Hanford also. This fire produced considerable, how do you like this, updrafts. This must have been written by the nuclear industry. Updrafts are about 9 days. It's got a little blue highlighter. Updraft is a small-scale current of rising air, often within a cloud. So we used to call those nuclear plumes, right? But now they're calling them updrafts. These people are insane. The heat was so intense that it melted firefighters' boots. The fire was finally contained on May 4th, 1986. The lofted plumes of fission products released into the atmosphere by the fire precipitated onto Western Europe and parts of the USSR. The estimated radioactive inventory that was released during this very hot fire phase approximately equaled in magnitude the airborne fission products released in the initial destructive explosion. Wow. You know what that means. It was almost like a bomb. It was probably worse than a bomb. And actually, I heard Kate Brown talking about that today. She said you can't really compare the Hiroshima bomb effects with nuclear power explosions when they have these meltdowns, because the fission that was released in a nuclear bomb effect only lasts for, boom, a flash second, and then it all releases. But when you have a nuclear accident, it's this ongoing, until the thing gets under control, it's going on and on and on and on. In this case, it took till May 4th. So from April 25th to May 4th, it was ongoing airborne fission products, which are still circulating the earth today because some of that stuff never really goes away. That's the other dirty little secret about nuclear. This is why I can't just let this go. It's beyond comprehension, the level of genocide. I can't, beyond me, how people who are working in this industry choose to ignore the negative effects on their own lives, their own children, their own children's diabetes, their own children's heart diseases. A good friend of mine, I consider him a good friend. He lives in Paducah, Kentucky, where they have a plutonium processing plant, and he was born with a cleft lip. His family worked in the nuclear industry. His mom, his dad, and he was born with a cleft lip. Now, yeah, that can be fixed with modern science, but it certainly caused him a hell of a lot of issues as a child and even as an adult. He never once thought that it came from the nuclear power facility until after Fukushima, until he started learning about nuclear contamination, like me, after the nuclear meltdown in Fukushima. That's a long time. The guy's 38. He didn't know until 2011. Like me, I grew up next to San Onofre Nuclear Power Plant in Los Angeles. Drove up and down the freeway all the time, right past it. I always thought it was an observatory. And now come to find out that part of the freeway is highly radioactive. How many times have I been stuck in traffic going down to San Diego, right next to the San Onofre Nuclear Power Plant? Lots. The freeway is so radioactive there. The land that goes across the freeway is owned by the United States government. It's so radioactive, the Navy doesn't want to take it back from Southern California Edison. This is what we get with nuclear every time. And the nuclear industry says, well, we've only had a very small percentage of... Could you imagine if we had a lot of nuclear meltdowns all at one time? There would be no life left on this planet, and that is exactly where we're headed with the rising oceans. That is it. All of the nuclear power facilities are all on the water. So this is why I keep doing this radio show, folks, because I'm just blown away. I just can't... It's beyond comprehension that our elected officials choose money over life. It is literally beyond comprehension that we have a system in place where we have doctors who refuse to test for nuclear contamination. I mean, I guess, having a president who doesn't want his national security advisor to tell him that the Russians are hacking into our elections, and all of his advisors say, don't tell him because you'll piss him off, goes along with this whole let's don't talk about nuclear thing. This is what we get when we allow one part of secrecy in our government. It just bleeds into everything. So now that now we have this whole set of thing where people don't really believe anything. Like I said earlier, that girl driving down the street, rolled down her window and yelled at me about Hanford instead of getting out her car and saying, wow, this is pretty awesome. But did you know about Hanford? She would have discovered that I have actually protested about Hanford and the Columbia Generating Station and met with Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley, who, by the way, give me lip service. They, oh, yeah, we're really concerned, blah, blah, blah. And then they support nuclear. They think it's a totally great thing. And in fact, our government does think it's a really great thing because President Trump just signed a document that said the United States is going to support nuclear, period. Let me see if I can find that presidential. Let me go to the Googles. Let me see if I can find that really quick. So, let me just type in. Let's see what it says. U.S. supporting nuclear energy presidential. President Trump. He signed this document in about a month ago. Trump signs legislation. This was October 1st. That's right. Trump signs legislation to promote advanced nuclear technology. That was October 1. So this is the headline that Google's popped up just now. It says February 12th, CEOs asked Trump to help them sell nuclear power plants abroad. Okay, so this is really where we're at. Let's see if we can read this. And this is on greentechmedia.com, dated October 1, written by Julia Pepper. Trump signs legislation to promote advanced nuclear reactor technology. The Trump administration has made shoring up existing newer nuclear power plants a key and controversial component of its energy agenda. But it's also looking ahead to the next nuclear reactor technology. On Friday, President Trump signed the Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act, NECA, which passed early last month with bipartisan support. Exactly. Ron Wyden voted for it. Bastard. The bill is expected to speed up the development of advanced reactors in the U.S. by eliminating several of the financial and technological barriers standing in the way of nuclear innovation. Financial barriers, you know what that means? There's nobody going to be giving them money. So the United States now is going to be paying for it with our tax dollars. That's what that means. There are some truly transformative advanced nuclear technologies being developed in America right now, and this bill just reinforces this administration's continued effort to revitalize the nuclear industry, said Ed McGuinness, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Nuclear Energy. You know what's really sick about this and all this money for research? They don't spend any money on figuring out how to stop it from getting into our environment. They don't spend any money on how to make it actually really go away. They don't spend any money studying how many people it's actually affected. They don't spend any money studying how to help the victims of nuclear contamination. They don't spend any money helping people get medical care from being contaminated from nuclear contamination. It's every single article that you will ever hear about nuclear is about the cost, and it is about the energy and about the cost and the budget plans. It has nothing to do at all with the human factor, with the concern for human life. You know, it's not even just human life. People across America are finding mutated flowers, mutated plants, mutated animals. It's not just human life. This is true ecocide. I honestly, like this reactor thing, I just like this blows me away about this issue about Chernobyl. About how they can just pretend like it's no big deal. Chernobyl is a big deal. Pripyat is an abandoned facility, and actually they're beginning to have tours in Pripyat because Fukushima has made nuclear contamination acceptable. And at least the Russians took it seriously and evacuated everybody. They evacuated 49,000 people, and people are not allowed to live there again. It's a completely abandoned city. Whereas in Fukushima now, they're going to have the nuclear games there. Folks, it's beyond comprehension that the 2020 Olympic Games, the opening ceremonies are going to be in Fukushima Prefecture. People are going to be going to sit in buildings made with reclaimed wood found around the Fukushima Prefecture, put up by Toshiba, one of the offenders who created the nuclear blast in Fukushima. So they're going to be sitting in buildings with reclaimed wood around the prefecture of Fukushima. So their bums are going to be sitting on highly radioactive wood, sitting, watching games in a highly radioactive, contaminated air. You know what's going to happen in Japan, folks, is we are going to see some athletes have heart attacks. That's what's going to happen. So let's see what Mr. Wikipedia tells us about this. And then I want to go back to the Chernobyl babies, because that is just an incredible... There's actually a really great movie. It's a documentary about the Chernobyl children. And I highly recommend it. It was my first exposure to those people. So let's blah, blah, blah. We're getting all the way down to what happened. Professor of Risk Management at the University of Bristol, Philip Thomas, in 2017, used the years of potential lost metric to conclude that the relocation was unjustified for 75% of the 335,000 people relocated after Chernobyl. This is one of the things that Kate Brown talks about, is all these weird facts that you listen to. The finding found that just 900 among the 220,000 relocated would have lost 3 months of life expectancy by staying home, and none should have been asked to leave. That's what this guy says. But you know what's really sickening about these types of comparisons? They're not talking about the third and fourth generation. It is not about what happens in the lives of the people who were directly in Chernobyl. It's about their grandchildren. It's about the third and fourth and fifth generations of babies. Let's go back to international, Chernobyl International, because this is what that statistic does not talk to you about. Because the Chernobyl children are still being born. Children are still to this day being born that are genetically mutated. Let me see if I can find this. There was a section on this page that I lost track of it. So hold on, let me get close to this, see if I can find it again. Okay, let's just read what this says. The explosion released just 3% of the radioactive material in the Chernobyl reactor into the atmosphere. The remaining 97%, contained only by deteriorating concrete shell, remains inside the reactor and continues to be one of the world's most dangerous ticking time bombs. So all of the radioactivity that happened actually cost us it was only 3%. That is actually a shock. Wow. I honestly don't know how people can handle this. There's a 4-year-old child. His name is Artem. He's in the cardiac program in Kharkiv, Ukraine. You know, they are helping people that need help. There are children still being born with problems. And it's going to continue till time immemorial. That's what happens with contamination from nuclear. Let's go to what the IAEA says. How about that? International. This is the United Nations, okay? This is what the United Nations says about it. International Chernobyl Remembrance Day, April 26th. That's tomorrow. An explosion of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in 1986 spread a radioactive cloud over large parts of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, now the territories of Belarus, Ukraine, and the Russian Federation. What about Europe? It actually did spread quite large all over Europe. In fact, the antlers of the reindeer in Norway and Denmark were affected. What about the radioactive contamination in Ireland, where the sheep are still highly radioactive in Ireland and you can't really eat the sheep? They used to eat sheep and now they can't because of this thing that happened in the Ukraine, because the plume went whoosh, west all over Europe. This is why the UN is a dodgy biscuit, because they always give us something wrong. You know, the UN actually really promotes nuclear war and nuclear weapons. I know they have this no nuclear war treaty, but you know, what a game. The United States refuses to sign it, so it's not being ratified. I mean, it's just the whole thing with the United Nations. And if the United Nations was a decent player, They would not allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to even be part of them. Nuclear energy needs to cease. It needs to be a science that needs to be studied at a private level, at a small level. They need to figure out how they're going to clean up the nuclear waste that they've already created. And I think this is the mentality now of the nuclear industry, is that they don't know what to do. It's kind of like Trader Trump. He's so far in deep, he doesn't even know how to get out. That's how they are. They have created, this is why they just keep selling nuclear and selling. Nuclear is going to be the death of this planet. It is not going to be, quote, climate change, which is another one of my bugaboos. Because you notice in climate change, they never include the negative effects that 60 years of radioactivity has had on the planet. I never will forget when I found out about Fukushima, thinking about that movie, Al Gore's movie, about climate change. You know, if you look at it, the CO2 started getting bad around when cars exploded, right? But also it happened around the same time we started bombing the planet. The planet got kablooied with so much nuclear contamination. There is no way it did not affect the wildlife or our oceans. It's incomprehensible. They say, oh, well, it's just such a small amount. No, it's not such a small amount, especially now that we have Fukushima and Sellafield nonstop. I mean, Sellafield puts out what? It's off the coast of Ireland, off of the coast of England, into the Irish Sea. It puts in 9 million liters of radioactive contaminated water a day. Fukushima dumps 100,000 gallons of radioactive contamination into the Pacific Ocean every single day since 2011. In Sellafield, I think, happened around 1992. So we are up to our earballs, man, in nuclear waste and nuclear contamination. And we are 100% covered with nuclear denial. And that is why I do this show. That's why I keep coming here. And I want to say thank you to anyone who's listening to this radio show right now. Thank you for being concerned. And I want to encourage you to reach out and look at other websites. Look at the Chernobyl International website. All you have to do is type in Chernobyl children and you'll find it. Go to the Hanford Challenge and look at what's going on at the hanfordchallenge.org webpage. They are, I guess what they are is really they're a set of attorneys who protect the rights of the Hanford workers. That's essentially what their life work is. Can you imagine at Hanford, there are people that work there and spend their lives there, and then when they get sick, they actually have to fight. They have to go to court to get medical care. In fact, right now up at Hanford, the government is fighting the state of Washington. They've taken them to court because the state of Washington passed a law that said that the Hanford workers should get medical care. I know I'm digressing about our Northwest nuclear news and not talking about Chernobyl. The Chernobyl disaster, which we're all supposed to just move along, little lady, and just move along. That's actually not something I can do, to be honest. I can't just move along. I thought I could, to be honest. I'm sort of sick of being the person in my circle of friends, the only one who really wants to talk about the dangers of nuclear contamination and why we need to not ignore it. I mean, it's a hard road to hoe because you can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it, and frankly, if you get contaminated, you're probably not going to feel it for another 10 years. So you have no idea. It could come from your milk. I mean, I started drinking milk last year for the first time in probably 20 years. And, you know, it made me feel weird because I know that milk has higher levels of radioactive contamination than most other milk and fish. And that has to do with how much the cows consume so much grass, right? And so, I don't know. Here's a page I found. This was a page called 10 Interesting Facts About the Chernobyl Disaster. I thought I'd just read that with you here. I'm just going to pop around on different ideas to get through this because I don't have a guest to interview. And I hope everybody's listened to Libby Halevi's shows on Chernobyl in the last week and this week. Listen to it for a few times. I always listen to her show a few times because there's so much information in there. It's almost like I have to keep up notes. 10 interesting facts about the Chernobyl disaster. And where is this from? It's called Running Wolf's Rant. I guess it's a blog. And it was written by Hanno Kruger. April 23rd, 2019. The Chernobyl disaster happened more than 30 years ago on the 26th of April, 1986 in Ukraine, which was part of the Soviet Union, USSR. SABC. He must be from Europe. He says, I still remember seeing the news report at the 8 o'clock news on the SABC on the day it happened. The Chernobyl disaster was the most serious accident in the history of the nuclear industry. No, it wasn't, sir. Fukushima is the most serious accident in the history of the nuclear industry. In fact, it is still the most serious accident in the history of the nuclear industry because it's ongoing. Fukushima, at least at Chernobyl, they put a big cap over it and they've had to replace it again, but they did do it and they did stop it. Fukushima is still spewing out radioactive contamination everywhere. 10 interesting facts about the Chernobyl disaster. The disaster occurred at 1:23 a.m. At this time, one of the reactors suffered a catastrophic power increase, leading to explosions in its core. This dispersed large quantities of radioactive fuel and core material into the atmosphere. Number 2, it cost the Soviet Union a lot of money. The battle to contain the contamination and avert a greater catastrophe ultimately involved over 500,000 workers and a cost of an estimated 18 billion rubles. Wow. Number 3, a lot of people were evacuated and resettled. In the aftermath of the disaster, between 1986 and 2000, plus or minus 350,000 people were evacuated and resettled from the most severely contaminated areas of Belarus, Russia, and the Ukraine. Number 4, the Chernobyl disaster remains the only level 7 incident on the International Nuclear Event Scale. Inspired by the Richter scale to measure the magnitude of earthquakes, the International Nuclear Event Scale is a tool for communicating to the public the safety of ramifications of reported nuclear and radiological incidents and accidents. Number 5, Belarus receives 70% of the contamination from Chernobyl. Wow. This landlocked country, which was also part of the Soviet Union at the time, is located only 10 miles from the border with the Ukraine. Thousands were affected by various fatal ailments ranging from leukemia and thyroid cancer to cardiovascular disease. To date, Belarus has lost well over $235 billion in revenue as a direct result of the Chernobyl disaster. 1/5 of Belarus's farmland was contaminated by the Chernobyl disaster. Number 6. The explosion at Chernobyl created an immense radioactive cloud. It was detected all over the European continent and even fell to the ground in Ireland in the form of a light, quote, nuclear rain, unquote. Although that was 25 years ago, the ramifications of the disaster are still being felt in the United Kingdom and Ireland. According to a study conducted by the British Ministry of Health, 369 farms and 190,000 sheep in Britain still contain faint traces of radioactive fallout from the Chernobyl disaster. On the positive side, the number of affected sheep is down nearly 95% from 1986, when 4,225,000 of the woolly mammals were placed under restrictions across the United Kingdom. Wow. 4 million animals. I did not know that. Number 7. Benefits are still being paid to 7 million people affected by the Chernobyl disaster. According to a study conducted by the UN Chernobyl Forum, Belarus, the Ukraine, and Russia are still paying significant benefits. According to the study, 5 to 7% of Ukraine's annual government spending still goes to Chernobyl victims. Number 8. Emergency crews had to react quickly following the explosion at Chernobyl. They responded by burying the complex in a massive concrete tomb that became known as a sarcophagus. 25 years later, it's still being used, and it's beginning to show signs of wear. Plans have been made by authorities to improve the structure, but none have been carried out yet. Number 9. Estimates for the number of direct and indirect deaths from the disaster vary. That is for sure, because the nuclear industry lies its ass off. The Chernobyl Forum, a group of 8 UN agencies and governments of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, have estimated the death toll at only a few thousand. The environmental group Greenpeace puts the eventual death toll far up to 93,000, including cancer deaths globally. The Chernobyl Union of Ukraine, a non-governmental body, estimates the present death toll from the disaster at almost 734,000 people. Wow. Number 10. It's going to be a while before the power station is decommissioned. I always like how they say this, decommissioned. This always blows me away. Okay, let's see what this says. Officials say it could be up to 100 years before the Chernobyl station is completely decommissioned. A 90-kilometer or 19-mile exclusion zone is in place around the disaster site. There you have it. These are some of the basic facts about the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. And this is who Wolf's Rant is. His name is Hino Kruger. He's a blogger. This is what he says. Blogger, desktop activist, Twitter, Facebook addict, music festival addict, avid lover of South African music, founder and owner of Running Wolf's Rant. That's interesting. So he's a desktop activist. That's an interesting phrase. We'll talk about that at a later date, won't we? Let's see how much time I have left, because we don't want to go beyond an hour. So I still want to thank everybody for hanging in there with me. And, on this day, I decided that I was just going to make up a little protest sign and go out and remind people in Eugene that Chernobyl is still affecting them, because the Columbia Generating Station, I know I sound like a broken record here every time I come live, but the Columbia Generating Station, of which we are forced to buy 4% of its electricity, we don't have an option, we are forced to buy 4% of its electricity, and we have to pay for it. It's losing $500 million a year. So that's one part of it. It's a financial disaster like every other nuclear industry, power plant. Nuclear is just not an economic kind of a deal. It always costs more money than it generates. But we have to buy for at least 4% of the energy here at eWeb. And it is Columbia Generating Station is sitting on top of live active earthquake faults. Now, can you imagine if we had an earthquake fault, what would happen if we had like in Chernobyl, they consider this to have been salvaged, like they got to it in time. What's going to happen when we have an earthquake at Columbia Generating Station and there's a meltdown and everybody's scrambling to deal with the meltdown and they have to evacuate 25-mile radius around the whole nuclear power plant because there's a huge meltdown. Anybody dies you die within 20 minutes if you get within 20 miles of a nuclear power plant. So they make a 25-mile exclusion. Now, Hanford is 12 miles away. So for sure, nobody could even wear a suit for 2 weeks. You cannot get in. You can't go there. Period. Nada. Nothing. For at least 2 weeks, you have to let the thing cool down before you could go there. So if we can't get into the Columbia Generating Station for 2 weeks, you can't get into Hanford for 2 weeks. If you can't get into Hanford, there are toxic pools that have been grotesquely neglected. Let's just be kind about it. I mean, the disregard for the nuclear waste at Hanford is beyond comprehension. All you have to do is go and look at a Google map of the site. Just look all over that 400 square disaster. You can see it from the air. They have just piles of just nuclear contamination sites just dumped around there. It's hideous. So what's going to happen when some of those most toxic tanks can't get churned? They are going to combust, and we will have a fire. A nuclear fire that no one's telling us about, just like what we have going on in Fukushima. We have gas coming out of those nuclear power facilities that they're not telling us about. They're pretending like, oh, it's fine, it's cooled down. They're still pouring water on those facilities 24 hours a day. And the water is still leaking into the river that runs underneath the nuclear power plants and out to the ocean every single day. Chernobyl at least was in the middle of a forest. Chernobyl at least has a cap on it. At least they evacuated people there. And, it's funny because I hear people say, well, we've heard stories that the forest, the animals are coming back. Yeah, the animals are coming back. But they're all radioactive, highly contaminated. This is not an energy source we need to be using. The only reason we have nuclear power plants is so they can make nuclear weapons. That's the real truth. It is really sad. Well, I'm going to end up here, folks. I don't know if any of you saw me out, any of you listening to me here in Eugene saw me standing out today with my sign. I stood out during rush hour. I went out there intentionally to stand out during rush hour to remind people that Chernobyl still affects people. Every nuclear facility that has had a problem still affects the community. The Navajo Nation had nuclear bombs dropped on it during World War II. Those people are still being affected. Their children are still being affected. What's it called? It's not Flat Rocks, for goodness sakes, I forget. But every year in the Navajo Nation, they have a commemoration of this bomb being dropped. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to go there with Libby Halevi in July. We'll do a live report from there. We have got to start taking this seriously. We cannot keep sweeping it under the rug and pretending like it's not happening. I know we act like battered wives, but at a certain point, the batterer kills you or you escape. And I'm all for escaping. I think we need to figure out a way to escape and refuse to get beat up anymore. Right now, our country is being pretty battered. What's happened to America right now is the very same thing that's it's the culmination of all of it, actually, when you think about it. There is no reason for us to have to live like this. We can love ourselves enough. We can love our planet enough to stick up for it, to stick up for ourselves, to say, no, we are not taking nuclear. We are not going to be developing new nuclear facilities around the country. And no, we're not going to let you stick the nuclear waste in Yucca Mountain. These scientists have to spend money figuring out what to do with it. Most of the money for the vitrification plant up at Hanford that's been allocated hasn't even been spent. And they keep asking for more money. How much money does the CEO of Bechtel make? This is the outrage. Why do these people get to make millions and millions of dollars of salary a year while they are heading a failing industry? It's beyond comprehension to me. Completely beyond comprehension. I'm going to encourage you to put your courage feet on. And that means that you have to walk with courage. These are frightening times, but you know what? You need your courage when you're afraid, when things are challenging, not when things are easy. And things are pretty hard. Things are pretty dark right now. We have a Congress who refuses to impeach a completely out of control fascist. We have the Democratic Party openly already telling us they're going to rig the nomination to give us Biden. I mean, the free world is no longer free. We're getting that message pretty loud and clear. But there's more of us than there are of them, and we can take it back. But we need to stand up and speak out. It's our time for us to love ourselves and love our children. Helen Caldicott had a radio show that got me engaged in this activity, actually, called If You Love This Planet. She interviewed Carl Grossman, Dr. Carl Grossman, who wrote Weapons in Space, which I read here. It was one of my first books I read. He said on her radio show in 2012, when I first found out about Fukushima, he said, this event in Fukushima is so big, we need everybody engaged. We are so used to telling ourselves, oh, no, I'm not important. I can't do anything. And so we don't do anything. He said, we can no longer, that is a luxury to have that attitude. Every person, every adult on this planet is called to action to save our planet, if we can do it. If we can do it. Tomorrow night, I'm driving up to a bookstore up in Portland to go see Guy McPherson speak. And I don't know if many of you remember the interview I did with Guy McPherson, but he did an interview, and he does not think that he's a biologist, a marine biologist, and his conclusion is that we have less than 50 years on this planet. In fact, he thinks we're all going to be dead by 2025 because there's not going to be any potable water. We won't be able to grow food. But I'm going to go listen to him speak tomorrow. I'll give you guys an interview on that, an update on that in a couple of weeks. This is not exactly a happy show. Talking about Chernobyl Day. It's very somber, and especially considering the fact that we know that the nuclear industry and mainstream media and the industrial military complex wants us all to believe that it's all okay, it's all been taken care of, and nobody got hurt, and you don't have to worry your pretty little head about it because it's all fine, perfectly fine. It's not. And it's up to us to demand a change. And I hope that you will change something in your life so that you can get actively engaged in this. And if you're very interested in this and you want to communicate with me, I would love to join forces with anyone out there. You can send me an email to nutsforart, nutzforart @gmail, or at ageofvision@gmail. I own both of those. I really appreciate you listening. I hope you guys have a wonderful week and a wonderful year. Please put your courage feet on. Take action. Your life will improve. Our lives will improve if we all take a little bit of action. As Dave says, 8 minutes a day is all it requires. So we'll talk to you guys soon. Put your courage feet on. Thank you for joining the Age of Vision radio show. Please like, subscribe, and share on Spreaker.com or on the YouTube channel Nuts for Art, NUTZFORART. Send all comments and ideas to Lonnie Clark at ageofvision@gmail.com. We urge all, especially scientists and politicians, to follow the words of our beloved American icon, Mark Twain. Always do right. This will gratify some and astonish the rest.